So our next speaker is Natalia Varela from Virginia Tech, and she'll be talking about the sedimentology of overbank turbidity current deposits in a high latitude channel levee system in Hillary Canyon of the Ross Sea.
Well, hi everyone, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Natalia Varela. I'm a PhD student in the Geoscience department at Virginia Tech, and I'm a part of the Dr. Brian Roman's Sedimentology lab. The talk that I will present today is based on the work that we have done with the sediment cores taken from the levees of a submarine channel located in the Ross Sea, Antarctica, to answer the question, can turbidites be used as a proxy for bottom water outflow? Or in a broader sense, can turbidites be used as a Pliocene proxy? This work is part of the IODP Expedition 374 and all the scientists mentioned here. Before we jump into the project itself, a bit of background. This work focuses on the Antarctic Bottom Water, which is the coldest, densest, and deepest water mass in the ocean and plays a key role in the global ocean conveyor belt, as you see in this schematic picture, bringing up colder water and nutrients from the deep ocean, seen here. So as a seasonal event, it is formed as in a few sites along the continental margin of Antarctica during the winter months. And those sites are the Weddell and Ross Seas and the Adélie Coast, shown by the arrows here. Also, this figure, the one that I'm just showing with my pointer, hopefully you're seeing it, shows the current situation in Antarctica and how the warming is affecting the west part of Antarctica more than the east part of Antarctica. And this is, of course, where the Ross Sea is located. And this has implications for bottom water formation and other oceanographic processes. Now, how is the Antarctic bottom water formed? It happens, as I mentioned, during the winter time as a product of an interplay between the sea ice and the atmospheric winds. And so along the shores of Antarctica, sea ice is blown by these very strong, cold, and dense winds called katabatic winds that are descending like over the cold glacial ice sheet. And those winds kind of push away the sea ice, leaving this space in between in the ocean, free of ice, called the coastal polynyas. Once this space is again up in the cold, it creates new sea ice and the process starts all over again. So this kind of creates this sea ice factory. Currently, as we can see in this figure, there is more than one site forming polynyas along the coast of Antarctica, and specifically here in the Ross Sea, as we can see by these winds shown by the black arrows. So the formation of the turbidity currents that are the main subject of this work are related to the polynya formation. So let me explain a little bit. The formation of the new ice leaves most of the salty water behind, creating this very dense water that, due to like gravity, descends down the slope in a process called the brine rejection. This denser and colder water sinks down, creating a turbulent plume that flows downslope and creates either a sheet with a eddy formation and Ekman drainage along the shelf, or it will actually form a plume. This dense plume, which is a turbulent mix of water and sediment, will flow down the slope and carve, of course, due to erosion processes, its path down the channel. And you can see this happening in this picture over here, where the turbidite current flows down the channel and spills out some of the sediment in suspension. So as a summary, turbidity currents confined to canyons or channels carry sediment in suspension. If the sediment is high enough in the flow, will eventually spill out in the overbank area. And this process is known as flow stripping. This process leads to the depositional construction of channel flanking levees, such as this, pointed by this orange arrow. And here is the major motivation for this work: is can this process be preserved in the levees of a submarine channel? To answer this question, this project is based on Site 1524 from the IODP Expedition 374 that drilled 5 sites in the Ross Sea, pointed out by these red dots. 1524 is located in the continental rise, specifically on the levee of one of these canyons here in the square. And this site shows a kind of a combination between amypelagic and turbiditic mud, coarse silt to very fine sand beds, diatom-bearing mud layers, and kind of consists with the matches kind of a more distal location on the canyon. Covers an age of Pliocene Pleistocene. Now let me introduce the submarine channel where Site 1524 is located. It's known as the Hillary Canyon. Hillary Canyon in the Ross Sea is a major conduit for the formation of this Antarctic bottom water. And in the seismic profile, the flow is coming at the viewer as towards you, as noted by this circled dot. And as we saw on the previous slide, this is kind of how it looks, the flow coming down from the shelf to the bottom of the basin marked down by these white arrows. Now, if you remember from a previous slide, the turbulent plume would spill suspended sediment over the channel, sediment that will be deposited on the levees and recording this process. So this is what we are proposing for 1524. So before I move on what we did, I would like to bring your attention to the size of this channel levee system, because the channel from kind of crest to crest has a maximum width of 40 kilometers and a depth of 500 meters. To try to make sense of the magnitude of this system, please look at this figure from the work of Dept and Sylvester. It shows the major channel levee system from around the world: the Zaire, the Beni Major, the Indus, the Amazon, Danube. The colors are just indicating, in this case, the light gray indicates the inner levees, the green is indicating the outer levees, and the darker gray indicates the channel deposits. Now let's compare them with the Hillary Canyon. This is a schematic view of the Hillary Canyon scaled to these channels over here. And you can see how big the entire system is. And just as a bonus feature, this is the NAMOC, the profile of the NAMOC, one of the largest submarine channels in the world. As you can appreciate, it's quite a large system, the Hillary Canyon, which makes you think of the size of the plume and the amount of sediment that is carrying. Now going back to the work that we have done so far, we did frequency counting. We counted 3,329 turbidite beds for 1524, along with characterizing them according to their thickness and completeness across the core, using core photographs and digital image analysis software to assess their frequency over time. We also took 100 pairs of turbidite beds and its overlying mud for grain size analysis. And in addition, to further understand the content of these turbidite beds, we made smear slides and characterized their diatom content in terms of their abundancy, completeness, and size. I just want to warn the microfossil experts, if we have any in the audience, that is this is just an exercise to better understand the content of these beds. No name or species were defined here beyond distinguishing between centric and pennant diatoms. Just a disclosure there. So methodology. So this is a close-up of what we defined as turbidite beds. There's like a sharp base. The average thickness that we calculated was around 1.5 millimeters. It has a recognizable yellowish color and a grain size that was slightly coarser than the surrounding mud. And the turbidite beds were analyzed using a laser particle size analyzer, the master sizer. Now for the mud fraction was sampled up to 2 centimeters above each turbidite bed, marked down by this green line. The mud fraction was sieved at 63 microns, so we ran everything that was below that mark into the X-ray particle settling instrument, the Sedigraph, to determine the grain size. Now our results. Here, in this column over here, for 1524 shows two main lithologies. The diatom-rich bearing mud here in yellow, and the gray for the mud, more heterogeneous material. The 3300 turbidites are marked down here in black, and the samples from them are in blue. So the results that we obtained from the grain size analysis on the turbidite beds show that the median grain size of the turbidite beds vary between medium to very fine silt, shown here, and the D90, meaning the upper end of the distribution, reaches up to very fine sand. So in general, it's a very fine sediment. As you can also see here in the plot, there's no very obvious systematic trend overall. We haven't found one yet. And the grain size pattern for the turbidite beds and for the overlying mud, they're kind of similar, the pattern in general, but it could indicate that they are genetically related. So about the counting and characterization of the diatom content of these turbidite beds, we have that the mineral versus the diatom content changes along the core, which is the same definition that they made for the entire section, not only the turbidite beds. And the concentration of the diatoms is higher at the bottom, therefore, and it diminishes as we go up. In average, the 98% of the diatoms in all the slides that we analyzed, including the turbidity beds and the overlying mud, are fragmented. And most of the material that I was able to recognize were centric diatoms, so almost not the other kind. And the fragmented material, it is highly angular, and it has an average of 15 to 18 microns of length, again, within silt size. Now, the 3300 turbidites with this average thickness of 1.5 millimeters were plotted according to the current age model for the section to try to recognize any patterns that might show up. So the frequency here of these turbidite beds were grouped into cycles of 200 kiloyears. And it seems like you all can see that it's a higher frequency at the bottom that diminishes at the top. But also we can observe that the frequency almost kind of diminishes sharply by 2.78 million years and at 2.18 million years, and goes to almost zero around 1 million years. So we have like almost no turbidites at all. During what is part of in terms of like climatic events, the mid-Pliocene warming, there is a gap, and that is especially interesting since it is located in a stretch with a really high frequency of turbidite beds. So we are still trying to figure out what this means. It could be maybe related to a warm excursion that was defined for the East Antarctic ice sheet between around the same time, within 3.17 to 3.15 million years. But this is still a work in progress. So the major takeaways for this work is that this site 1524 really presents a unique opportunity to characterize these turbidite deposits that could have been generated by the formation of bottom water, Antarctic bottom water during the Plio Pleistocene. And the grain size distribution throughout the core, as I mentioned before, revealed no systematic trend overall. But at the same time, this could be interpreted as being deposited by the same process over time. The frequency of the turbidite beds throughout the section diminishes as it goes towards the top. And this, along with the absence of certain turbidite beds in certain sections, could be attained to other climatic forcings, including orbital. And one of the questions that is still a question, if the higher frequency of the turbidite beds at the bottom is a result of sediment availability given by a higher diatom production, or a signal of an increase in bottom water outflow, still remains, and the next step is to include other proxies into this to kind of assess what was the actual bottom water production over the Plio Pleistocene in the Rossi. And that's all that I have, thanks to my advisor, Dr. Ryan Romas, and the whole IODP Expedition 374 scientific party, among all my sponsors. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Natalia. Does anyone have any questions? You can raise your hand or write something in the question, and we can just have you ask her out loud as well. Okay, we've got a question in the chat from Kathleen. Was there evidence for diatom dissolution? Note that they become more fragile as they dissolve, so that angularity might be breakage associated with sieving. What was the 63 plus micron fraction?
Yeah, okay, so one of the things that we recognize in just like this kind of overview of the sediment was there was some evidence for dissolution for sure. We are not sure what it means in this context, because at the same time, the fragmentation could have been a product of the transportation. If we think about turbidity currents transferring a lot of sediment across the shelf and into the basin. So, but yes, there was some evidence for dissolution for sure. Not sure what it means, not gonna lie.
Great. We've got a second question. Could the decrease in frequency of turbidite beds up section be related to deposition on a levee? Beds in levee successions usually fine and thin upward.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good guess in a sense, because that could happen as the levee keeps growing. Probably the plume would not be able to reach the same height, meaning that might be not as much sediment available in the upper part of the plume. So that could be also something that we have to take in account before making more interpretations, for sure.
Great. Okay, we've got two more questions, and I think we have maybe another minute left. So how would you distinguish significant bottom water outflow?
So that's kind of the main idea for this project, in the sense that we are like trying to use turbidity currents as this proxy, while at the same time acknowledging that we are not certain about how this by itself kind of answer that question. So this is still part of the work. I wouldn't even have an answer for that. The main thing would be just like the setting, the fact that we already know that bottom water is being formed in that area in the present time. So that would be a good first step. And using that as a context for our findings also is part of the idea, but we're not like 100% certain of how this process could be recorded in this type of sediments.
Okay, great. And then one more question from Emma. You said that beds have an average thickness of 1.5 millimeters, but is there any pattern in bed thicknesses? Do they thin upward?
One of the things that we found very interesting is the fact that the thickness kind of stays the same, even up section, but the frequency is the one that changes. So we were kind of surprised by that, because it was not expected, but it seems like it keeps being the same. So yeah, it doesn't change. I mean, it does not change.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your questions. We're going to, and a reminder, if you have questions that come up later, feel free to contact any of the presenters. And all of this material will be saved as well, so you can go back and check on things.